Well, if they didn't work, why is it that there are now more people in detention under this government than there ever were under the previous government? There's something of the order of 3,700 arrivals have hit Australia under this government's policies. Surely, what's bad for someone's mental health is being in detention in the first place. It's good to minimise the number of people who are in detention. Temporary protection visas are in effect a safe haven visa. They provide a haven for someone while their country isn't safe. I think that that's something that is actually good for someone's well-being.
Mark Butler, I want to ask you about the mining tax. Of course, last Friday we saw the resolution. The big mining companies seemed happy with that compromise, but some of the smaller companies are saying they were left out of negotiations. We know that today a delegation of mining executives from those smaller companies will be meeting with the Resources Minister, Martin Ferguson, today. Is the government still open to changing that tax after these negotiations today, or is last Friday's version of the tax the real deal?
Well, look, my understanding is that last Friday we released the framework for the new tax arrangements for minerals and also for petroleum. What we also did, though, was to establish a group, an implementation group, co-chaired by Martin Ferguson, the Resources Minister, and by Don Argus, a former chair of BHP. And they'll be looking at a range of implementation issues which you'll understand are incredibly complex in this area. And one of those will be a capacity for smaller miners to raise some of their concerns. But we make the point that we'd talked to a range of smaller miners over the last several weeks and couple of months. We were pretty clear about what their issues were, and we think a range of them are dealt with very well in the package that was released last week. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that absolutely everyone will be satisfied with every aspect of the deal. That's just not humanly possible, but we think we've got a balanced deal that is the best thing we can do for the country, provides certainty for the future of the mining industry and for our economy growing forward, and it particularly provides some very important reforms in the area of superannuation, a reduction in corporate tax, which Tony Abbott would increase by 2%, and a $6 billion infrastructure fund that will particularly be targeted to regional resource-based communities. So we think it's a very good outcome. It shows that Julia Gillard can get things done, and there will be the capacity for smaller mining companies to raise implementation issues with Martin Ferguson and Don Argus.
Even though there are concerns that the government may not be able to raise the $10.5 billion of revenue that it wants to from the new tax, will Wayne Swan release all the Treasury modelling showing exactly how those figures are going to add up? Because you are getting a lot of criticism saying that now effectively the rate is more like 22%, so if you bring that down from 40% and there's only $1.5 billion difference, those numbers don't seem to add up.
Well, we'll be releasing our modelling and other budget-relevant figures in the usual way in the lead-up to the election, and we'll do that in the same way previous governments have.
Mitch Fifield, if Tony Abbott becomes Prime Minister, is he really going to dump a tax that would bring in that much revenue when the large mining companies are comfortable with it? His stance on this has become a lot more difficult to prosecute, hasn't it, after last Friday?
Well, I don't think so. What we saw at the weekend was that the government arguing that this new deal provided certainty. We saw Chris Evans and Stephen Smith at their joint press conference saying that the deal's great because it provides certainty. Well, the only reason that there was uncertainty in the first place was because this government created it. There still isn't certainty. There's something of the order of 300 mining companies who will be affected by this tax who still haven't been spoken to. There's a number of issues to resolve, as evidenced by the establishment of the reference group, the Argus-Ferguson group. So there's still no certainty. But coming back to your question, Ashley, in relation to our position, well, the measure that we apply to tax reform, or what should be tax reform, are three things. Tax reform should involve the abolition of inefficient taxes, it should involve the improvement of existing taxes, and it should involve reducing the overall tax burden. Now, this new tax, this new deal, fails on each of those three counts. So why would we continue with it if we're in government? We wouldn't. If you want to end this tax, if you want to stop this tax, then you've got to change the government, you've got to vote for the coalition.
But Tony Abbott keeps saying that the upcoming election will be a poll on this mining tax. That now seems pretty unlikely, considering that it has been largely neutralised as an issue.
Well, we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. As I said, there's something of the order of 300 companies who will be affected by these new taxation arrangements who haven't been spoken to. Those other mining companies who won't be affected by these new arrangements are themselves unhappy that they haven't been discussed. They haven't had these issues discussed with them. They're unhappy that they may be at a relative disadvantage to some of these other companies. So there are a whole lot of issues which are still yet to be addressed.
Mark Butler,
this has got a way to play out yet.
Mark Butler, Colin Barnett, the WA Premier, is saying that the new tax may be unconstitutional. Is that a valid concern, or does government advice suggest otherwise?
Well, ultimately that's for the High Court, but we're very confident that this is a constitutional tax. And just going back to Mitch's point, I mean, Joe Hockey said when the package was released that this was a coup for common sense. And I think what Mitch has said and what Tony Abbott's said since Joe Hockey made those comments says a lot about the relationship between common sense and Liberal Party policy. There's not much there.
Just finally, one last issue. We saw yesterday the Liberal Party launched a new TV advertisement showing Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard as puppets on strings. Mitch, do you really honestly think that Julia Gillard is a puppet? And also there has been some criticism about this ad that you call Julia Gillard a girl in the ad. She's Prime Minister, she's obviously a woman, not a girl. Is it sexist?
Well, I'm a boy, you're a girl. Mark's a boy. I don't think we should get too hung up on that. And Julia Gillard's been telling us that she's not politically correct and that everyone should feel free to engage in open debate. So I'm sure she's not precious about the ad itself. Sure, look, Julia Gillard is subject to influence. She came to power as a result of decisions taken by union leaders such as Mark. This wasn't the Australian people having the opportunity to cast their verdict on Kevin Rudd. This was a small group of influential people in the union movement who decided that Kevin Rudd had to go. She came there as a result of their influence, and she will be subject to their influence.
Well, Mark, it sounds like Mitch thinks you've got some blood at least on your hands. Are you worried that this is a sort of ad that will feed into that perception that Labor is run by faceless union men? The way that Kevin Rudd was dumped, it was damaging to the party's brand, wasn't it?
Look, it was a difficult process, but a vast number of people... Difficult
is an understatement, isn't it, Mark?
It was a difficult process. A vast number of people in the caucus thought that a good government had lost its way and needed to change. It was caucus members who made that decision. A significant number of caucus members led Kevin Rudd to the decision that he shouldn't contest that ballot. A very similar process to the one that the Liberal Party has been involved in on a couple of occasions since the last election. Having said that, it was a difficult process, but the Liberal Party response seems to be some pretty silly and juvenile ads.
OK, Mark Butler, Mitch Fifield, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ashley.
Coming up after the break, the Green Senator Sarah Hanson.